Celeste is a game that has been praised to the moon and back down to earth by pretty much anyone who ever played it. It has a 79% like rating at Steam with almost 100,000 reviews. It has one of the most fascinating speedruns in gaming history. It was one of the first indie games to ever get nominated as Game of the Year, even though 2018 was a really strong year in gaming overall. It features some of the tightest movement controls in all of gaming, has an insanely high skill ceiling, but remains incredibly accessible at the same time as well. And it has a wonderful story that left a lasting impact, at least on me, when I first played the game. Anyone I ever talked to who played the game loved it. And I wholeheartedly agree, Celeste is a wonderful game, an almost flawless masterpiece, from the very first jump until we grabbed the final crystal heart in the mountain center. Pretty much every aspect of Celeste has been rightfully praised up to heaven and back down to earth again. But there is one aspect of Celeste that is often overlooked. One aspect that, at least in my humble opinion, is the most interesting one about the game's story, and more importantly, where it actually draws inspiration from. You see, on the surface, Celeste is about climbing a mountain. We play as Madeline, a young girl struggling with herself and feeling lost in life. A young girl who set herself a goal. She set out to climb Celeste Mountain. On the surface, Celeste is a platformer that has us slowly climb to the top of this very mountain. But that is obviously just the surface, because of course our journey through the game is also a metaphor. It is a metaphor for Madeline's struggle to come to terms with herself. At its core, Celeste is about struggling with a darkness inside of us, and about us learning how to deal with it and how to learn to accept ourselves. So all of this probably comes as no surprise to no one. It's honestly pretty obvious. The game isn't exactly subtle in how it communicates its themes. Which is far less obvious, however, is how much wisdom there is actually hidden within Celeste's innocent little story. You see, the game has far more to say about life than the usual just believe in yourself goop that most media tends to spill out if we shake it long enough. Celeste, if shaken thoroughly, begins to reveal really unusual ideas and a really interesting message. You see, while it is not unusual for games or media in general to tell the tale of a protagonist who has to overcome their inner struggles, Celeste is very unusual in how Madeline actually overcomes this very struggle. The school of thought or philosophy that is hidden below the game's tale is quite unusual and something seldomly talked about. So let's change this. In this video, we will embark on a journey. We will follow Madeline on her journey to the top of Celeste Mountain. We will take a look at a lot of interesting aspects of the game along the way. We will try to make sense of some of the more unusual aspects of the game's story. And in the end, we'll take a deep dive into what I believe to be the psychology behind how Madeline overcomes her inner struggle. Gentle ladies, gentlemen, and gentle people in general, we got a mountain to climb in front of us. Before we start, just one more thing. Due to the nature of this video, this thing is going to spoil the entirety of Celeste, start to finish, including the final boss fight. Don't worry, that is not the final boss fight in the background yet. That is, to no one's surprise, just a Hillary step. The final obstacle that mountaineers historically had to overcome before reaching the top of Mount Everest. My name is Ceave, you're watching Ceave Perspective, a place that hopes to give interesting perspective on great games. This is Celeste. The game begins with the sound of a car engine stopping. We read the following words. This is it, Madeline. Just breathe. Why are you so nervous? And then we hear the sound of someone exiting a car and get our first glimpse at the game. We are at the foot of the mountain. All that we got with us is a single bag in which we carry a bunch of our belongings. Other than that, we are on our own. We hop over a couple of pits and reach the second screen. There, a little bird teaches us how to climb. And then we already meet the old woman. The old hag tells us how to reach the mountain trail, but only after saying a word of warning. Apparently, the mountain is a strange place. A place that may show us things that we are not yet ready to see. We obviously ignore her. The next screen features the bridge towards the mountain, but while we pass it, the bridge suddenly collapses. We run as fast as we can, but it is too late. We can't make the final jump. Our journey is about to end before it even truly begins. When all of a sudden, the bird appears again. He teaches us a new ability, the main ability around which most of the game is built. The dash. You see, when we hit the B button, Madeline dashes into one of the 8 directions. Thank you, little bird. What a helpful feathered fellow he is. And with this, the tutorial of Celeste already comes to a close. The game isn't even running for 2 minutes, yet it already established a ton of things. We know the core controls. We know that we play Madeline and that our goal is to climb Celeste Mountain. The game already established the character of Granny and the bird, as well as Madeline's personality. We already got a hint that Madeline suffers from some inner struggle, and we already know that the mountain is a mysterious place that may challenge us in ways we do not anticipate. The game doesn't even waste a second. We're just minutes into the game and we're already in the midst of the action, while knowing the keystrokes of the story. And that's just the beginning. The first level takes place in the Forsaken City. Theo tells us a little bit more about its history. So Theo, we meet Theo early in the first stage. He's a photographer exploring the mountain and the city below to shoot beautiful pictures. He's basically going through great lengths to finally grow his social media. Relatable. He tells us a bit about the history of the place that we're exploring. A mega corporation built this city long ago. But then no one wanted to live in it, and now it stands here abandoned. But at least we get to enjoy the leftovers. He's a nice little fellow and we immediately get along with him. He even tells us some quite important advice towards the end of the conversation. He tells us, and I quote, YOLO. And with this, it is time for us to jump our way through the game's first stage and to explore the Forsaken City. And it is time for us to ask a question. Why? Why is the first level of the game an abandoned city? You know, Celeste is a game about climbing a mountain. An eerie abandoned city is quite an unusual set piece for the first level of a mountain climbing game. You know, there are old marketing signs standing around asking us if we are already beach ready or telling us to man up with an energy drink. It's almost a bit liminal, a very unusual setting for the beginning of a game. The developers chose the setting for a reason, but what was their line of thought? And I think Theo just gave us the answer in the dialogue before. You see, the city was literally built by a megacorporation, but no one wanted to live in it. It's, you know, homes that no one wanted to live in, homes that were built by a megacorporation. The city represents a certain meaninglessness that is often attributed to modern life, work, and to the artificial values that our society sometimes tends to value. I think the idea is that the lives that megacorporations lay out for us are meaningless and empty. Such a life can't give us a fulfilling home. Someone else, in this case an economic force, wants us to live this kind of life, but barely anyone would choose it consciously if confronted with a choice. It is to highlight where Madeline is coming from. The city's life that Madeline is struggling with. Her journey to climb the mountain is an attempt to find something better than what she's leaving behind. And thus the very first level has us leave an empty city in which no one wanted to live that was designed by a corporation. Madeline escapes her own life so far and the values of the society around her here. And after platforming past lots of dangerous pits and spiky spikes, we finally make it out of the city. There we light a campfire and then we immediately fall asleep. When we awake again, something strange is going on. We explore the old site next to us. As we explore deeper and deeper into it, we suddenly encounter a mirror. In this mirror, we see our reflection. But it isn't our true reflection. Something is wrong. The mirror reflects a much darker version of ourselves. As we get closer to the mirror, suddenly a crack. The mirror breaks and our dark mirror image escapes. The dark bubbles suddenly activate and thus we explore deeper and deeper into the old site until we find the dark mirror image that escaped again. Our mirror image talks to us. She tells us that she's part of us and that she's incredibly happy to finally be out of our head and that she's worried about us. She tells us to go home. And then our alter ego actually starts to chase and to attack us. And now the gameplay changes. Not only do we have to survive all the dangerous obstacles that the mountain throws at us, but we also have to be careful not to get hurt by our own reflection, the first enemy we encounter in the game. So here's the fun fact about Celeste's enemies. There are barely any of them. As a matter of fact, this here is one of very, very few enemies in the game. You see, there are only a couple of times where we actually have to fight or escape a foe. Almost all obstacles in the game are inanimate. The only exceptions are 3 or 4 instances in the game where we actually find something animated. And those couple of enemies all have something in common. Something quite interesting if we actually think about it. They are all some sort of reflection of Madeline's self. Why? Again, why would the devs decide to limit their own design space so severely and only use enemies in very special cases and only design them in the image of Madeline? Why would the developers limit themselves like this? And the answer, at least in my humble opinion, is that they prioritize that all struggle in Celeste comes from within. There is no outside force that is trying to prevent us from climbing the mountain. The only thing that is trying to prevent us from reaching the summit are we ourselves, which wonderfully ties into the themes of the game. Awesome. After escaping from our own dark self, we reach a small public telephone. As we pass it, suddenly it rings. We pick up the phone and a really interesting story moment happens. Madeline tells the person on the phone that we are in danger. Something is chasing us. But the other person isn't worried because of this. On the contrary, they tell us that we only ever call when we are panicking in the middle of the night. And then Madeline suddenly realizes what's going on. She's dreaming. The other person on the phone is her ex who hasn't spoken to her in months. Apparently Madeline went through a rough breakup before the events of the game and still dreams about her ex-partner. When we awake again, the telephone we dreamed about is still there. This time we pick up the phone ourselves and call our mom. She asks us how our trip has been. We tell her that it is okay, but that we are a bit overwhelmed. And then something really interesting happens. Our mom says, "Oh no, are you having another panic attack?" She tells us to focus on our breathing and that she's here for us. The screen then fades to black before we ever hear Madeline's answer. So those two phone calls may look like innocent little interactions, but I believe they are not. As a matter of fact, I believe they tell us quite a lot about Madeline's past. Those phone calls are central to understanding the third chapter of the game, because chapter 3 is quite strange. So what is the third chapter all about? Well, following the path, we reach the Celestial Resort Hotel, an old and long abandoned hotel. The chapter takes place in this abandoned hotel, but it is not the hotel that is of interest for us. It is the hotel's concierge, Oshiro, who is the focus of the chapter. Oshiro is a ghost. He's long dead, the hotel long abandoned. But poor Oshiro doesn't know that. He believes that the hotel is still a wonderful place to stay for travelers. But worst of all, poor Oshiro is incredibly insecure about himself. When we talk to him, we immediately notice that he tries to convince us to stay at the hotel, not only because of money, but also because he needs someone to stay in this hotel to feel good about himself. He tries to manipulate us into staying. He simply ignores it when we tell him that we just intend to pass by. When he leads us into the central room of the hotel, he suddenly realizes that the place is in a terrible shape. The hotel hasn't been thoroughly cleaned in years. Everything is out of place. Stuff is lying around, blocking the walkways. It is a total mess. There is so much cleaning up to do that the room at the heart of the hotel transformed into a confusing maze. And then something important happens. At the center of this mess, we confront Oshiro. He realizes that he'll never be able to sort out this mess alone. He realizes that his situation is hopeless. Look at how Madeline reacts to Oshiro worrying. She tells Oshiro to just breathe. And then she comes up with the idea that we are going to help him clean up his mess. This is the setup of the chapter. Oshiro wants us to stay in the hotel because he's insecure about himself and his business. But the hotel is long abandoned and in no shape to welcome anyone in. We, on the other hand, don't want to stay, but come forward with the idea that we help Oshiro to get the place back in shape so that someone else may be able to stay here in the future. We then set out to clean up the mess that Oshiro didn't take care of for years, when we suddenly encounter Theo again. Theo is desperately trying to escape the hotel. We tell him that we think Oshiro just needs help, but Theo tells us that he thinks Oshiro is an old creep. He tries to escape the hotel, crawling through a vent. Theo tells us that helping Oshiro is dangerous and that we need to get out of here and call an expert on the matter before he crawls through the vent, and then we go on and try to clean up someone else's mess. So what do we make out of all of this? You know, this setup is incredibly weird. On the one hand, we want to help Oshiro, but Oshiro doesn't necessarily want our help. What he wants is for us to stay so that he can feel secure about himself. On the other hand, there's Theo, who is established to be a genuine friend of ours, who is desperately trying to escape through a vent and who tells us that Oshiro is beyond saving. And finally, there are we, ourselves, who don't want to stay at the place, but want to help nonetheless. Quite the unusual setup for a video game. To make matters even stranger, the whole chapter does not end in a happy ending, but in a catastrophe. After we cleaned up Oshiro's mess, he shows us our room and begs us to stay, when all of a sudden, the dark part of ourselves escapes another mirror. She insults Oshiro before breaking a hole into the ceiling through which we can escape, and atop the ceiling, it comes to the showdown. We talk to our dark self, who asks us why we play some dude's therapist if what we truly wanted to do was to climb the mountain. And then Oshiro pops up once again and asks us why we would be nice to him only to run away, and our dark part gives a really interesting answer. She tells him that we only help people to feed our twisted ego, but that she never truly cared about Oshiro. This pushes poor Oshiro over the edge. He transforms into a terrifying ghost and chases us out of the hotel. We run. Carefully, we avoid all of his attacks. We scream at him that we just wanted to help, but Oshiro is beyond saving. Angrily, he destroys the platform we stand on, causing the two of us to fall and to transform Oshiro back into his true self. He's closing the hotel and tells us to leave him alone. And with this, the chapter ends. We failed to help him. Alrighty, right. So what do we make out of all of this? You know, this is a really strange storyline and a highly unusual setting for a platformer or any game really. Why did they write this chapter like this? What is the intention here? Well, the answer is in the two phone calls we had directly before we reached the hotel. The call with our ex and our mom. So the more obvious one first. Our ex-partner. You see, the entire setup of this chapter is a metaphor for Madeline's relationships, in specific the relationship with her ex. You see, everything takes place in a hotel. A hotel is quite literally a place to stay. But this place to stay is so cluttered that no one can stay there. It is so cluttered because the owner did not take good care of it. Instead of taking good care, the owner is incredibly needy. Oshiro wants us to stay with him because he's incredibly insecure about the place he calls home. The whole setup is a gigantic metaphor for a toxic relationship. Someone not taking good care of themselves and needing someone else to feel secure in themselves is no good setup for relationships. Theo, who is framed as a true friend of Madeline, immediately realizes that he can't help Oshiro. Oshiro doesn't actually want help getting his home back in shape. He wants someone who is willing to stay in the mess with him. He wants to feel secure about the mess, not take care of it. This is why Theo takes the first vent and nopes out of the whole situation as fast as possible. Madeline, however, decides that she wants to help Oshiro. It is her idea to help him in the first place. Why would she want to do this? And the dark part of ourself just gave us the answer before. Because we need to help someone to feel good about ourselves. It allows us to escape our own problems. The first thing that Madeline does after escaping the meaninglessness of modern life, symbolized by the city, is to find meaning by helping someone who doesn't really want to be helped. The second thing she does is to head into the classic setup of a toxic relationship. And it ends as relationships that are built around needing someone else to feel comfortable with ourselves always end in a catastrophe. Since we have a fictional phone call with our ex directly before the chapter begins, I think it's quite reasonable to speculate that the events in the hotel mirror Madeline's relationship with her ex. Alright, but what about Madeline's lovely mother, one might ask? Well, Madeline's lovely mother might not be so lovely after all. You see, the game gives us a very small hint that the relationship between Madeline and her mother might be toxic as well. Remember the mom phone call? There is something quite interesting going on there as well. At least as I understand the scene, Madeline doesn't have a panic attack here. Later in the game, Madeline actually has a panic attack, and this scene is framed very differently than the phone call. Think about it. Madeline never tells her mom that she's having a panic attack. It is her mother that assumes that this is why Madeline calls. Her mother tells her to just focus on her breathing before Madeline even says something. Which brings us back to how Madeline decides to help Oshiro, because there is a small detail in this scene that links it to the phone call with her mom. See, after Oshiro realizes how cluttered everything is, after he realizes that he can't possibly ever get his home back in order again, after he says that it is all hopeless, after all of that happened, Madeline tells him to focus on his breathing. Madeline gives Oshiro here the exact same advice her mother gave her at the beginning of the chapter. Those scenes mirror each other, and I doubt that this is by accident. It's doubly interesting because Oshiro isn't having a panic attack here either. Directly afterwards, Madeline decides to help Oshiro without Oshiro asking her for help. He even tells her that she shouldn't even bother. You know, Madeline's behavior towards Oshiro here mirrors her mother's behavior towards her in the call earlier. So if we think the metaphor through, then Madeline takes on the role of Oshiro in the call with her mother before, and her mother took on the role that Madeline later takes on for Oshiro. So since the relationship between Oshiro and Madeline is obviously toxic, it makes me wonder if Madeline's relationship with her mother might not be the most healthy one as well. I think it's reasonable to at least speculate that Madeline and her relationship with her mother may be part of the reason why Madeline is struggling so much with herself in the first place. Hooray! After leaving the hotel, we meet the old woman again. We tell her that Oshiro chased us away after we cleaned up a bunch of junk for him. The old woman answers us that Oshiro is a lost soul and that we should not make him our project. Another pretty clear hint at what the whole fuss was about. Cool. So with this, Madeline left the meaningless and empty corporate city behind. She set the dark part of herself loose and she escaped her toxic relationships. With this, she's finally ready. She's finally ready to actually do some mountain climbing for once. We, however, won't be climbing alongside her for a while, because we will travel far into the future of our playthrough. Because before we are ready to discuss Celeste's ending, we first have to discuss the ending of Celeste. This here is the second to last level of Celeste's base game. It is the final screen of the C side of the 7th stage. The way Celeste works is that each stage comes in 3 difficulties. The A or normal side, the one we play through during the story. In each stage there is a cassette tape hidden. If we find those, we unlock the much harder B sides of the levels. If we somehow manage to beat all of those as well, we finally unlock the C sides. And the C sides contain the hardest platforming challenges in the game. To be honest, they contain some of the hardest platforming challenges in all of gaming. And this screen here is the hardest screen of all of those hard challenges. So everyone's experience with the game varies, but for me, this screen was by far the hardest in the entire game. So let's turn on a couple of Celeste's amazing assist features to give you an overview over the screen. So first, all the spikes here are an instant death. We first have to jump off of this cloud and then time our dash precisely so that we fall through this hole. Next we have to dash into this spring, dash upwards to make it through this tunnel and then hit the upper left part of this spring. If we hit it anywhere that isn't the upper third, we do not get enough height and die. Here we double dash past the obstacle and quickly fall down through a corridor. Then we dash back upwards at first and then up next to get to the next spring. We have to fall through this hole while already slightly pushing to the left so that we make it through the spikes alive. Dash to our right and then up again to hit the next spring, and then we have to zigzag dash past those spikes, bounce off once more. Now we once again fall through a spike tunnel and have to dash twice to make it out of it alive and onto a cloud. We bounce off the cloud, but we have to be careful not to get too high as there are spikes above us, and then dash upwards into the next spring. And then things get a bit difficult. You see, the next jump is actually really tricky. Celeste has a special wall jump mechanic that is only tutorialized well after the normal ending of the game. If we dash upwards towards an overhanging wall and then hit the wall jump button, then we can do an extended wall jump and jump off the wall with a lot more height. And this is the exact thing that we need to do here. We have to first dash towards this tiny piece of wall, and then when we are exactly beyond it, we have to dash upwards so that we can get the better wall jump off of this tile. This allows us to grab the crystal here. Those crystals refresh our dashes. With those dashes, we can make it to this cloud. From this cloud, we can bounce off, but we have to be careful not to hit the spikes above us, and then we can dash towards the final spring. This spring then pushes us into the final part of the screen, the dash maze. I hate the dash maze. We are now in a very long corridor filled with spikes and crystals. We have to quickly dash from crystal to crystal to reset our dashes and to proceed in the stage without falling into the spikes below us, but also without accidentally dashing into the spikes in front of us either. Once we made it past all the dangerous dash crystals, we can finally dash out of the maze and grab the wall on the other side. This wall now falls down as a final thank you, but if we are quick enough, we can hop over it, and with this we master the screen. Who and Ray. So why are we waffling about this screen in so much detail, one might ask? Well, to visualize something. You see, Celeste is a very difficult game. It's an absurdly difficult game. The screen we just discussed. Stuff like this is usually not found in the vanilla version of a game. Stuff like this is found in ROM hacks. That's the difficulty of a queso level. You know, the most difficult stages in Mario Wonder killed me maybe 20 times. This screen killed me almost 2000 times until I finally got it done. Celeste's base game really asks the player to master the game's core mechanics. Usually games have wrapped up long before they push the player to this level of mastery. Here's where this gets interesting. You see, when we start playing Celeste and die at the most simple jumps imaginable, it is unthinkable that we'll ever get good enough to beat the screen like this. But by the time we actually reach this screen, it feels like nothing more than another challenging screen that we certainly can overcome. Celeste is incredibly good at making us good at it. The difficulty of the game just ramps up in such a natural way that we barely notice how much more difficult the game is becoming. While playing the game, every screen just feels this tiny bit more difficult than the one before. The difficulty ramps up in incredibly small steps, but it ramps up drastically. You know, if we can beat the normal story, then we can also beat the easy B-sides. If we can beat the easy B-sides, we can also collect all the strawberries. If we can get all the berries, then we can also beat the tougher B-sides. But if we can do those, we can also do the easier C-sides. And if we did those, the harder ones aren't that much more difficult anyway. After we beat the hard C-sides, doing some of the stages deathless to get a golden strawberry doesn't sound that crazy anymore. And so on. You know, people that grabbed all the golden strawberries are only a small step away from learning the speedrun, and at that point, why not try and go for a really good personal best time? Celeste just has a built-in difficulty curve that smoothly trains players to get insanely good at the game. Much better than most games ever ask a player to get at their systems. And this is something that makes Celeste incredibly unique and rewarding to play. But back to Madeline. How's her mountain climb going? She's fought against strong winds, falling platforms, and terrific terrain, but slowly and steadily made her way up. Awesome. Sadly, her great times are about to come to an end. You see, at the end of this climb, we meet Theo again, right in front of a gondola. The gondola seems to be in pretty rough shape, which is worrisome, because it is our only chance to cross the chasm. We ride the gondola, and a really interesting story moment happens. First, Theo asks us how things with Oshiro turned out, and Madeline tells Theo that he was right and that she should not have helped him, before all of a sudden, the other part of ourself appears. The gondola suddenly begins to shake violently and comes to a halt, and thus we're stranded, high up in the air, in a broken gondola, and then we're suddenly struggling. We see how darkness closes in around Madeline. Dark clouds are forming in front of her. She's losing control over herself. She can't control her breath. Madeline suddenly suffers from a panic attack. We stand up there, unable to control ourselves anymore, when suddenly something curious happens. Theo now helps us to get over the situation. The same Theo that just moments ago told us that we should not have tried to help Oshiro. This Theo now helps us. He teaches us a breathing technique. He tells us to close our eyes and to imagine a feather floating in front of us. It is our breath that keeps the feather floating. The game puts a literal feather in front of us and we play a small minigame representing Madeline focusing on her breath. We take over Madeline's breathing here and we help her to get back control over the situation. The same Theo that told us that we should not have helped Oshiro is helping us here. But things get even stranger because next we help Theo. You see, after the panic attack, the gondola starts to move again, and we reach a mysterious temple built high up in the mountain. This temple is a dark and mysterious place. It seems quite dangerous, so Theo naturally heads into it heads over heels without thinking about it twice. And naturally, he ends up in trouble. We find his phone in front of a mirror. Something has happened to him. After exploring the temple for a bit, we find a mirror, a gigantic one. We stand in front of it, and then a strong and mysterious vortex suddenly pulls us in. We get sucked into the mirror. Metaphorically, we get sucked into our own self here. Once we're inside the mirror, we are no longer Madeline. We're something different. Something much, much darker. The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild brought many changes to the established 3D Zelda formula. It is the first Zelda game to feature an open world. It is the first one to not feature items that Link finds along the way. Breath of the Wild is the first Zelda with voice acting, the first one to allow us to head to the final dungeon at the beginning of the game, and most importantly, it is the first Zelda game to feature Hetsu. But maybe the most interesting new thing that the game brought to the Zelda series is the ability to climb almost every wall in the game. Almost any vertical surface can be climbed. All that Link has to do is to run towards it and jump, and he'll climb on it for as long as he has stamina. We can always gauge Link's stamina by taking a look at the little green stamina wheel that we get to upgrade over the course of the game. Cool, so why are we waffling about the climbing in Breath of the Wild in a video about Celeste, one might ask? Well, because Celeste actually features an almost identical version of climbing as Breath of the Wild does. There is just one crucial difference between the two. You see, in Celeste, Madeline is also able to climb almost any vertical surface by jumping towards it and by pressing a grab button. And just like Link, she then can climb up and down for as long as she has stamina. The crucial difference between the games, apart from the obvious fact that one is in 3 and one in 2D, well, Celeste does not show us Madeline's stamina bar. Madeline's stamina bar slowly drains while climbing, just as Link's does, but we never get to see her stamina represented in game. The only indicator that we get is that she starts to flash red shortly before she's out of energy. And I think it is a really interesting choice by the developers to hide Madeline's stamina bar, because you know, it's not a difficult feature to implement. It's not difficult to have a small stamina bar pop up as soon as she starts to climb. The developers deliberately don't show us her stamina here. And if we take a closer look at the UI elements of Celeste, we can immediately see why. Just take a look at the user interface. Do you notice something? Exactly, there is no user interface. There is no health bar, no strawberry counter, no death tracker, no map, well, nothing really. And that is for a very simple reason. Celeste uses a very minimalist approach to design. A very minimal approach that I think really suits the game. But it is not just the user interface, where Celeste confronts us with as little information as absolutely necessary. It is also in how Celeste tutorializes its mechanics. All gameplay elements are introduced in a safe environment and in a way where we can learn them on our own without the game ever coming to a halt to teach us something in a cutscene. So far, that's just basic game design. Why are we talking about this? One might ask. Which brings us back to the mirror scene, because the mirror scene contains one of my favorite tutorials in all of gaming. You see, after entering the mirror, after metaphorically entering ourselves, we suddenly control a monster that is chasing Madeline. Just like Madeline, the monster has a dash ability, but unlike Madeline, this dash ability is much more uncontrolled and is much more forceful. So forceful, as a matter of fact, that it destroys walls. We dash our way towards Madeline, destroying the walls along the way while avoiding bright light fields, because those those are impossible for the monster. The scene goes on until we finally reach and devour Madeline, and I honestly think this little innocent section is one of the most creative and innovative things in all of gaming. You see, what this section effectively is a tutorial. Those monsters are a gameplay mechanic in the upcoming stage. They dash towards us, they destroy walls, and they can't make it past the shining bright light fields. We have to dodge them. We have to use the light walls as defenses, and sometimes we have to manipulate the enemy into destroying walls for us. And when we encounter the enemy for the very first time, we already know all of this because we played as the enemy before, which is such a unique and creative idea for a tutorial. I truly love it. Additionally, the scene serves an important story reason, while it flawlessly bridges the two parts of the chapter together and stays true to Celeste's minimal design philosophy. And yeah, it's pretty brilliant. 5 shiny rainbow fuzzies. After reaching ourselves, we respawn on the other side of the mirror. The other side is quite disturbing. There are monsters that chase us, there is dark fog, and there are twisted vines growing out of the ground. Nonetheless, we platform our way through until we finally find Theo. Poor Theo somehow entrapped himself inside a crystal. Oh and no, we have to get him out of here. Theo can't walk because of his crystal problem, but that's not going to stop us. If he can't walk, then we have to carry him. And thus we pick up Theo. He now becomes a gameplay element, and we have to juggle him around while we platform towards the exit. I really enjoy the platforming in those sections. Theo and the crystal just ends up being a really interesting gameplay gimmick, in my onion. At the very end of the section, we run into a gigantic eye that is watching over us. We throw our entrapped friend at it, and by the magic of friendship, the spell is broken. Theo escapes his crystalline prison, and we return back to the real world. Exhausted, we escape the temple, light a bonfire, and for the first time in a while, come to rest. And then we have a chat with Theo. And this chat with Theo is, at least in my opinion, one of the absolute highlights in the game, which is really interesting, because nothing really happens in it. But before we have a chat about our chat, we first have to chat about something else. See, there's a parallel between what happened in the hotel and the events in the temple. The third chapter is all about us learning that we shouldn't have tried to help Oshiro. So far, so unusual. The fifth chapter, however, is in stark contrast to this. Here, we help a friend. Here we truly save him. We literally have to carry Theo on our shoulders out of the temple because he isn't able to do so himself. Helping Theo is in complete opposition to helping Oshiro, and I suspect that this is very much deliberate. While Oshiro wants us to stay with him, he doesn't necessarily want our help. Theo, on the other hand, really wants our help. While we choose to help Oshiro to help ourselves, we actually help Theo for no other reason than that we like him. While Oshiro wanted us to stay with him, probably forever, Theo wants our help so that he's able to walk on his own again. Or to put it differently, we did not help Oshiro because of our appreciation of him, but because the two of us depended on each other in an unhealthy way. We do help Theo, on the other hand, because we truly appreciate Theo and just want to be there for him, for no other motivation. At least as I understand the game, it is making a very subtle commentary on the nature of relationships here. We can't help people if we depend on them or if they don't really want our help. But we can and should be there for our true friends, for the people we appreciate, just for their own sake, when they need and want our help. In my opinion, it is really important that the game has us save Theo and depicts those events in a contrast to what happened in the hotel. Look, the point of the Oshiro section is, at least in my opinion, a very clever and intelligent point. It is, however, also extremely cynical. It might be true that our relationships are sometimes not built upon the noble intentions that we claim they are. But if a game brings up this point, I think it is really important to also contrast it with an example of an actually healthy human relationship, because otherwise we kind of end up making the point that helping other people is narcissistic and that we are probably better off not being there for someone ever. Something that I don't think is an especially beautiful message. But that is not the point that Celeste ends up making, because Oshiro is contrasted with Theo. Now the game points out to us that real friendship and healthy relationships are only possible if we respect each other for what we are and don't try to use or change each other. That's a true healthy relationship with someone else. true friendship. And this is what the scene with Theo at the bonfire now is all about. The two of them now just talk with each other. They talk about mundane things, but the whole thing is written so beautifully and with such an innocent charm that I truly adore the scene. We talk about the events that just happened. We talk about Theo's sister and his grandfather. We thank Theo for being here for us when we had a panic attack. And then Theo asks us why we're even climbing the mountain. We tell him, and I quote, "You're right, I don't even know why. I just had to get out of my head. I'm stuck in a cycle." Theo says, "You're preaching to the choir here. I've had many soul-destroying day jobs." To which we answer, "Work is fine actually, I'm going crazy. I can't stop thinking about dumb crap that doesn't matter. My brain fixates on those stupid things that happened forever ago. I should be over them. None of it even matters. I'm good at keeping up appearances, but the truth is, I'm barely holding it together." Theo says, "I'm sorry, that's pretty rough stuff. Can I help?" To which we answer, "You are already helping. It feels good to say it out loud." Theo asks us, "You don't talk to anyone about it?" "No, not really. My mom knows I get depressed and have panic attacks. That's about it." Theo says, "No wonder you feel trapped. How do you cope with anything?" To which we answer, "I drink mostly and get mad at people on the internet." This final line here always gets a chuckle out of me. The game here so cleverly and innocently points out something that probably contains a surprising amount of truth. At the end of the conversation, we take a selfie together with Theo, and then we fall asleep. We awaken below the polar lights. There is a strange feather right beside us. If we touch it, we transform into a bright ball of light and soar into the air. And there we encounter even more feathers. We fly higher and higher. Behind us the dancing lights. And at the very top we encounter the other part of ourself. We both float high up in the air. It is finally time to reconcile our differences. Madeline now finally understands who she is. She is not her true reflection. The dark part of her is everything that she needs to leave behind. It's her cruel side, her paranoia, her controlling side. Madeline understands that she doesn't need this anymore. In this scene, high above the ground, we finally set the dark part of ourselves free, and our other self tells us that we are so stupid. There is no leaving her behind. Madeline immediately has another panic attack. We once again conjure the image of the floating feather to calm us down. Slowly we regain control of the situation before the dark part of ourselves slashes the feather in two. There is nothing holding us together anymore. And suddenly we fall. We fall and fall and fall. We fall back down to where Theo sleeps, but the ground breaks below us, and then we fall even deeper. We fall back down, back to the feet of the mountain. All the climbing we did to get to this point, all our struggle, all the challenges we survived, all is suddenly undone. We crash back onto the ground at the very foot of the mountain. It was all for nothing. The year is 1941. We are in Austria, in Vienna to be precise. A young Austrian doctor is faced with one of the hardest decisions in his entire life. He's the head of the neurological department of the Rothschild Hospital, and he's Jewish. Austria, however, is under the control of the terror regime of the Nazis. Jewish people are already being deported, but his occupation grants him and his family protection against the deportation into one of the Nazi death camps. And this is exactly why the young doctor had such a difficult choice to make. You see, when the Nazis overtook Austria, he applied for a visa to leave the country and to migrate to the United States. And on this fateful day, he finally got an answer. His visa was approved. He was allowed to leave the country and to migrate to the States. He was able to escape the terror of the Nazi regime. But if he were to accept this visa, his parents would lose the protection that his occupation granted them. If he were to leave the country, he would send his parents to their death. If he were to stay in Austria, his parents would continue to enjoy the protection, but no one knew for how long, given the fanaticism that was governing the country. He had to make a decision within hours. And Fassi meditated over the question, trying to figure out what to do. And after a long struggle, he came to a decision. He knew what he had to do. Madeline crashed into a cave. We were back at the bottom of the mountain. We were so close to the summit. But now it is all over again. The dark part of ourselves just refuses to leave us alone. Madeline hates her. But then she realizes something. She is part of her. She will never be able to get rid of her. She wasn't able to climb the mountain because of this part of her. And she has to face a horrible truth. She will never be able to get rid of the very thing that prevents her from climbing the mountain. We're back in Vienna. The young doctor has made up his mind. He let the visa expire. He decided to stay in Austria in a desperate attempt to save the life of his parents. What he did not yet know, however, was what the Nazis were actually capable of. As it turns out, the protection his occupation had granted him was short-lived. His position was not able to protect his parents. But even worse, it also stopped to protect himself. In 1942, only 1 year after he let the visa expire, his parents and the doctor himself were arrested and deported. The doctor was imprisoned together with his father in the concentration camp of Theresienstadt. 6 months later, his father died there because of starvation. Strangely enough, the young doctor would years later write down that the death of his father filled him with a strange peace, because he knew he had done everything in his power trying to protect him. The name of the young doctor is Viktor Frankl. After climbing out of the cave at the bottom of the mountain, Madeline meets an old acquaintance. Madeline meets the old woman again. She tells her that her dark self was right all along. She wasn't able to reach the summit. She has to accept that she will be miserable forever. And then the old lady says something surprising. She tells Madeline to go talk to her other self and to find out why her other half is so scared. Madeline never thought that her dark self might be scared. She decides to go talk to her. She decides to look for the other part of herself and to figure out what is going on. Frankl goes through a total of 4 concentration camps, including Auschwitz. He's confronted with the cold, the brutally hard labor, terrible imprisonment conditions, beatings and torture, the sadism of the guards, the slow death of most people around him, and the knowledge that every day he could be sent directly into the gas for no reason at all. He was confronted with an incredibly difficult situation. He had to find a way to conserve his own humanity inside of him, even under conditions that were constructed to rob him of his very essence. Before the deportation, he had begun to develop a new form of psychotherapy. The core idea of this therapy is that it is not our suffering that causes us despair as humans. It is only suffering that we suffer through, in which we can't find meaning. Frankl was convinced that human beings were capable of mentally handling even the most extreme forms of suffering, as long as they somehow found meaning in it. He therefore thought that psychotherapy should focus on helping people find meaning in their suffering. And here in the concentration camps, he was forced to therapize his first and maybe most important patient, himself. After exploring the mountain for a bit, Madeline eventually notices a strange darkness. The dark rays lead her to what she's looking for. She finally finds the dark part of herself that she tried to send away. As she approaches it, she tries to start an honest conversation. First, she apologizes. She tells her other half that they are at rock bottom. There is no point to fighting anymore. But her other side isn't having any of that. She is willing to keep digging. Madeline tries to get closer, but her other half lashes out. She attacks us. She tries to prevent us from reaching her. The imprisonment confronts Frankl with some of the most hellish evils that humanity ever unleashed upon themselves. But even though Frankl knows that he could be murdered every day, even though he has to expect to get beaten without doing anything wrong, even though he's close to starvation, even though he does not know about the fate of his family and has reason to suspect the worst, even though he's forced to do brutal labor in the most bitter cold, even though he suffers immensely, he realizes something comforting amongst all the terror. he realizes that there is something the Nazis can never take away from him. He will always be free to choose which stance he takes towards his own suffering. He will always be free to describe meaning to it. This is something that no one is capable of taking away from him. We chase our dark self past many obstacles. It is attacking us viciously. She shoots dangerous energy balls. She fires lethal lasers into our direction. She causes the environment to collapse and even manipulates the mountain to try to crush us. But Madeline decided that her darkness is not going to stop her anymore. Slowly but steadily, we chase ourselves. We reach her, but she escapes. We grab her again, but she chases away. Until finally, we manage to get to her. We finally manage to confront our darkness. She gives up. She tells us that we won. She will try to go away. But to her big surprise, that is not what Madeline wants anymore. Instead, she asks her for help. She touches her other self and tells her that it is okay to be scared. And with this, the evil spell is finally broken. The darkness behind us finally fades away, and rays of light reach us again. On the 27th of April 1945, after surviving 3 years in 4 different concentration camps, Frankl was finally freed by the US Army. As soon as he regained most of his strength, he did what he had promised to himself while imprisoned. He wrote down the thoughts about suffering and meaning that he developed while imprisoned. And 1 year later, his book, Man's Search for Meaning, was published. In the book, he not only reflects on his time in the death camps, but he also tries to understand the psychology of humans during the most dire crisis. And the book ended up becoming a bestseller. Millions of copies were sold in dozens of languages, and it shouldn't be the only book that he would write. As a matter of fact, he would write 38 more. Frankl's work single-handedly founded a new school of psychotherapy, logotherapy, form of therapy that would go on to help millions of people all around the globe. And Frankl would live to see it all. In 1997, Frankl died in Vienna, the very city he once refused to flee from to protect his parents. He died at the age of 92. His ideas are still widely taught and practiced today. As Madeline hugs the side of herself that she has been struggling with all game, something strange happens. As the two lie in each other's arms, her former dark self suddenly dissolves into shiningly bright bubbles of light. The two fuse together. Madeline's hair color changes. The violet hair of her dark self and the red hair of Madeline fuse together, and the violet and the red mix into a warm pink. And then a message appears. Level up. Madeline leveled up. She's now able to perform a second dash while in the air. With this new power, she's finally able to climb out of the hole she's stuck in. But even better, with her newly gained power, maybe it is still possible to reach the summit if she can climb like that. And then all of a sudden Theo and the old woman appear. They encourage us to continue our climb towards the summit. The dark side in ourselves is still afraid, but she's willing to give it a try. Theo asks if he can help us, but we have to do this on our own. There is just one thing that he can do for us, and that is to hold our bag. We drop our bag and give it to Theo. You see, we drop our baggage here, not only literally, but also metaphorically. I always thought that was a nice touch. We are ready to climb. There's just one more thing that we have to talk about before we try to reach the summit. Why do we waffle about the life and the ideas of Viktor Frankl in a video about Celeste again? Well, I'm glad you're asking. To answer this question, we have to take a deeper look into his psychology, how he thought about human healing and suffering, and what all of this has to do with Madeline. The theory that Viktor Frankl developed is a very unusual one. At its core, Frankl believes that human beings are ultimately free in which stance they take towards any situation, and that if they were able to find a stance towards a situation that gave their suffering meaning, their suffering suddenly became bearable. For Frankl, happiness was not something that could be pursued, it was something that ensued as a result of us living a meaningful life. Or in other words, he thought about happiness as the feeling that arises when we become the person that we actually want to be. But becoming what we truly wish to be is often only possible by suffering and by struggling to get there. Because of this, Frankl never tried to free people of all suffering or struggles, but instead thought about how people could become able to bear their struggles, how they may even be able to welcome them. And his answer was to find meaning in this struggle. And this finally brings us to Celeste, because I believe that this very idea is at the center of Celeste's story, but one step after the other. So Celeste is about Madeline coming to terms with herself. It is about her making peace with something in her that she struggled with. And by extension, the game in general is about how to come to terms with aspects of ourselves that we struggle with. The game isn't specific what the struggle is. As a matter of fact, I think it deliberately leaves it open for interpretation. It could be a struggle to find meaning in a cold and empty corporate world, something the game hints at with the setting of the very first chapter. It could be a struggle to truly connect with people in a healthy way and thus being trapped in toxic relationships, like the game hints at in the third chapter. It could be us struggling with depression, fear, anxiety, or panic attacks. It could be us struggling with addictions, or our gender identity, or general feelings of inequality, or the loss of a loved one, or a breakup, or just a general feeling of unhappiness and meaninglessness. Over the course of the game, Celeste brings up all those potential struggles and even more. Celeste is about Madeline overcoming those struggles in herself. Celeste is about Madeline healing, which brings us to a really interesting question. How does Madeline heal herself over the course of the game? What is it that allows Madeline to come to terms with herself? How does she therapize her struggle? And this is where Frankl enters the picture. As most of you exceptionally smart people already deduced, the way I see it, Madeline's journey throughout the game and the way she heals herself shares a lot of similarities with how Frankl thought about healing. Let's go over the events of the game again, and let's look at them through this lens. So first, Madeline sets the part of herself free when she breaks the mirror. Her dark part is a metaphor for every potential inner struggle that we might have. It is our pain after losing a loved one, our addictions, our depression, our anxiety, our panic attacks, anything. The question is how to come to terms with any potential inner struggle, not something specific. So far so good. But then things get really interesting. You see, after the events in the hotel and after helping Theo, Madeline comes to the conclusion that she doesn't need the dark part of herself anymore. She decides to get rid of the thing that causes her suffering, and this causes Madeline's catastrophic fall. And you know, at least in my opinion, it is really interesting. If there is something in us that we do not like about us, it seems plausible to try to get rid of it. But at least in Celeste, that is not an option. Madeline trying to get rid of the part of herself that she can't stand is what sends her into catastrophe. As I understand it, what the game is saying here is that there is no permanent way of getting rid of our suffering, and that there is just no way to achieve a state in which we do not struggle with something within. In Celeste, we first try to outrun our struggles, but there is no escaping ourselves. We try to defeat the struggle within, but fighting against ourselves is by definition self-defeating. We try to send the struggle away by telling it that we do not need it anymore. But this very thing is what causes our ultimate downfall. The argument that the game makes in the scene leading up to the fall is, at least as I understand it, that there will always be some form of suffering within ourselves, something we struggle to come to terms with. It is simply unavoidable. Madeline tries to get rid of this, and this very attempt is what causes her the most pain, which brings us back to the thoughts of Frankl. In his first book, Frankl writes, "Mental health is based on a certain degree of tension. The tension between what one has already achieved and what one still ought to accomplish, or the gap between what one is and what one should become. Such a tension is inherent in the human being and therefore is indispensable for mental well-being. We should not then be hesitant about challenging man with a potential meaning for him to fulfill. I consider it a dangerous misconception of mental hygiene to assume that what man needs in the first place is equilibrium, a tensionless state. What man actually needs is not a tensionless state, but rather the striving and struggling for a worthwhile goal, a freely chosen task. What he needs is not to discharge of tension at any cost, but the call of a potential meaning waiting to be fulfilled by him." Madeline tries to get rid of this very tension in herself. She tries to send her struggle away. But at least, according to Frankl, this is not how to achieve mental well-being. He thinks the way to achieve this is by having a goal truly worthy of us, something so important to us that we are willing to tolerate the suffering. And this pretty much happens in Celeste. After falling, Madeline accepts that she won't be able to get rid of her darkness. Instead, she integrates it into herself, in Celeste quite literally, and this is what finally heals her. So far, all of this is exceptionally useless. You know, so far the game tells us not to fight our suffering, but to accept it, which is extremely hollow advice. It's almost a bit cynical to tell someone suffering through panic attacks or through severe depression just to accept themselves. It's like telling someone sick just to be healthy instead, because then their sickness will go away. Advice like this is only useful if it also includes advice on how to actually get there. The question is not if it is a good idea to come to terms with our struggles. The question is how to do this. Luckily, Celeste gives us an answer, and the answer that Celeste gives is the same that Frankl gave in the quote from before. It is to strive and struggle for a worthwhile goal. You see, what is it in the end that allows Madeline to come to terms with herself? What is it that in the end causes her to accept the part of herself that she struggles with? And the answer is the mountain, or the goal to climb it, to be precise. As I understand the game, reaching the top of the mountain is a metaphor for trying to achieve any goal. The point is that Madeline has found a goal that she's willing to suffer for. The point of the metaphor of climbing a mountain is not the mountain, but it is that Madeline wants to climb it despite how hard it is to get to the summit. The point is the struggle. Madeline decides for herself that there is something she wants to achieve, something worthwhile, even if getting there might not be pleasurable. Namely reaching the summit. It is so important to her that she is willing to confront the parts of herself that she struggles with. And this journey of her trying to achieve something bigger than herself is what ultimately allows her to reconcile her with her darkness. Madeline deciding to climb the mountain is metaphorically what Frankl meant with meaning. When Frankl writes about meaning, he isn't speaking about something spiritual or about something huge. What Frankl means at its core is simply an answer to the question of why. Nietzsche once wrote in a sentence that Frankl was very fond of: if we have our own why of life, we shall get along with almost anyhow. The idea is not to try to live a life without suffering. The idea is to find something that is so worthwhile that we are willing to suffer for it. Sometimes it can be a very small change of thought that makes a massive difference. You know, if you're afraid of taking an exam, why are you taking it? Are you trying to become a doctor and want to help people in the long run? Well, here's your why. Are you afraid of publicly speaking? Why do you want to speak publicly? Is it part of an education that serves a higher purpose? Do you want to get your ideas out into the world? Is it for your career? All of those things are a why. They are something that gives the struggle of speaking publicly meaning. If you're afraid of flying, then why is it that you want to fly in the first place? Is it to meet a loved one who you know would be rejoiced if you were to visit them? Well, that's a why. Wanting to see a loved one can give a struggle of suffering meaning, in this case a flight. The point here is that meaning, as Frankl thought about it, isn't necessarily a bigger-than-life thing, but can also be something small, like being there for a loved one. The idea is to find a meaning to a struggle, to find a purpose in suffering, to find a goal that is so worthwhile that we are willing to tolerate our fear and anxiety. There's a really strange paradox going on in the human psyche. Namely, if we do not want a positive experience to end, it sometimes transforms the positive experience into a negative one. But the acceptance of a negative experience in itself is a positive experience. You know, it is not too hard to imagine the last day of a wonderful vacation going completely awry because we do not want to return home. But it's also not too hard to imagine how someone who's afraid of flying may get out of the plane with a huge smile on their face because they decided to act despite their fear and flew anyway. Enduring something for a bigger purpose often transforms the struggle into something positive. Frankl argued that finding a why behind our suffering, that seeing purpose in our struggles, that having a bigger goal in mind that is the reason for our actions is much more important for well-being than it is to get rid of the reason why we are struggling or suffering in the first place. And I think that the way Madeline heals herself over the course of the game resembles this idea a lot. You know, the dark side of herself never goes away. Over the course of the game, we learn that her dark side is afraid of the climb. She then integrates the dark side into herself. She doesn't get rid of it, instead she accepts it. She accepts that being afraid is part of her. She just acts despite it. The other part of her stays afraid. She just acts nonetheless. And then she climbs. And getting to the top of the mountain is not easy. As a matter of fact, it is really difficult, not just metaphorically, but also in gameplay. The final stage of Celeste is certainly no walk in the park, but we started this journey so long ago because we wanted to reach the summit, and no matter how hard it is to reach the top, no matter what hardships the two have to endure to get there, we are willing to endure it to climb the mountain. And thus we climb it. After a long and difficult journey, Madeline finally manages to reach the summit. She succeeded in what she set out to do. And then she and her dark side just enjoy the view for a bit. They take a look at how far they have come, and they enjoy the view together. Early in the game, when Madeline and Theo were sitting together at the bonfire after escaping from the temple, there is a bit of dialogue that I quite like. Madeline asks Theo if he's close with his grandfather, and this is what he answers. "Yeah, I was." To which Madeline replies, "Oh, I'm sorry." But Theo says, "It's okay, that's just how it is. All I can do is stay positive and live a meaningful life, because that's what he would want." What Theo is doing here is describing meaning to the death of his grandfather. He can't change the fact that his grandfather is dead, but he can choose to stay positive and to live his life in such a way as his grandfather would have wanted him to. And funnily enough, this life that his grandfather would have liked him to live is a meaningful one. The life and death of his grandfather meant something. If it is the reason why Theo decides to live in the way he does, it helps him to get to terms with the death of his beloved grandfather, because he knows a part of him lives on in Theo. But there is something else that this scene does. It reminds us of something. The scene reminds us that not all suffering in life is actually avoidable. We will lose loved ones over the course of our life. There will be sickness, there will be horrible social situations, we will embarrass ourselves, we will fail at things, we will hurt ourselves and be hurt by others, we will enter toxic relationships, we will have our hearts broken, we will end up in fights with people we love, we will be disappointed by others and disappoint others ourselves. And in the end, we will die. There's just no way around it. The question is not how to avoid those things, because they're unavoidable. The question is how to keep going despite it. As I understand Celeste, this is the question that the game explores. I believe what Celeste is saying, below the tight gameplay and the absurd B and C sides, is that there is no escaping our darkness, but that there are things in life that are so worthwhile and so important that our struggles with our problems dwarf besides the importance of the task ahead. As I understand Celeste, the game tells us not to try to rid ourselves of our struggles and our suffering, but to instead do something else. It tells us to look for a mountain and then go climb it. Because sometimes it is exactly this metaphorical mountain, whatever this may end up being, that allows us to resolve what we were quarreling with. To close with another quote of Frankl. There is no shame in not reaching one's goal, but it is a shame to live without any goals at all. So, we talked a lot about the ideas of Viktor Frankl in this video, and there is something about Frankl's worldview that I think is important to point out. Something that has nothing to do with Celeste, but that I think should be mentioned nonetheless. You see, in recent years, Frankl often pops up in a certain circle of the internet that I'm lovingly going to call the super self-optimization crowd 3000. In this crowd, Frankl is often discussed in a certain way that I want to address. So when this crowd retells the story of Frankl, they often tell the tale of how Frankl was able to find meaning even in the Nazi death camps and how this gave him almost superhuman strength that the other inmates were lacking, and therefore he was able to survive while the other inmates died. The point being that everyone can gain this super duper overhuman strength by finding meaning in what we do, which allows us to become even more productive. Something along those lines. It's not especially difficult to find this take online, it's honestly everywhere. And reading Frankl like this is a bit disgusting in my opinion, and I want to address this. So first, the idea that a person imprisoned in one of the Nazi death camps had any kind of control over whether they survived or not hints to a complete and utter misunderstanding of what the Holocaust was. Just to give you one number, of the roughly 960,000 Jews that were deported to Auschwitz, over 860,000 of them were murdered on arrival. The death camps weren't incredibly harsh environments in which only the strongest were able to survive. They were, from the ground up, designed to murder their inmates. There is simply no layer of individual responsibility when it comes to the question of whether someone survived this imprisonment. And this is not what Frankl is talking about. What he actually writes about is that people who somehow managed to find meaning while imprisoned were able to keep their humanity, even in an environment whose sole purpose was to rob one of one's human essence. While he does write about people close to him who, when they lost their hope and meaning, were no longer able to survive the harshness of the camp, he fully acknowledges that pure and simple luck was the reason why he survived. He's not saying he had to find meaning because meaning is a magic trick. He says something else. He says that he had to find meaning to be able to remain human. He was able to preserve his dignity during the suffering, but by no means did it free him of the suffering. What Frankl is concerned with is the question how it is possible for humans to remain human even when forced with suffering that can no longer be overcome by one alone. There's an anecdote in his first book that I think highlights beautifully what he actually meant. He writes, and I quote, "Once an elderly general practitioner consulted me because of his severe depression. He could not overcome the loss of his wife, who had died 2 years before and whom he had loved above all else. Now how could I help him? What should I tell him? Well, I refrained from telling him anything, but instead confronted him with the question, what would have happened, doctor, if you had died first and your wife would have survived you? Oh, he said, for her, this would have been terrible, how she would have suffered. Whereupon I replied, you see, doctor, such a suffering has been spared her, and it was you who have spared her this suffering, to be sure, at the price that now you have to survive and mourn her." He said no word, but shook my hand and calmly left my office. In some way, suffering ceases to be suffering at the moment it finds a meaning, such as the meaning of a sacrifice. Alrighty, right. So here we have it, all about Celeste in a video about logotherapy. Or the other way around. Before we wrap this up, just a couple more things. So first, a gigantic and mountain high thank you to all my wonderful patrons whose names are currently scrolling by. Videos like this one have a really hard time surviving on YouTube, and the wonderful people whose names are currently scrolling by are helping me to somehow get by, even if the YouTube algorithm isn't a big fan of content like this. Speaking of which, the last couple of videos sadly were struggling to reach an audience, which is sadly a problem simply because how many hours it takes to produce them. So my best guess is that YouTube isn't happy with how seldom we have new videos around here, and thus I'm sadly forced to experiment a bit with different shorter videos in between the bigger ones we've been doing around here so far. So the next 1 or 2 videos will be a bit smaller and more focused on a single topic in the hopes to make the almighty and all-knowing YouTube algorithm all happy sunshine content yum yum again. The good news is I'm pretty excited about those videos as well. So whatever really. Shout out again to all the wonderful people who support this channel on Patreon. I'm not joking when I say that videos like this one would not be possible without their generous support. Second, something I wanted to waffle about in the video, but realized that I don't have anything of value to add to the discussion. So Madeline's gender. Madeline in the game is trans. You see, Celeste's main writer, Maddie Thorson, is trans herself. She was, however, however, not entirely aware of this fact during the development of Celeste. Because of this, certain parts of Celeste's story are inspired by her struggle with coming to terms with her gender identity. She did a wonderful write-up about Celeste, herself and Madeline's gender on her website. There is a link to it in the description if you're interested. It is a really interesting read. Awesome. And with this, it is time to wrap this up. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this little video. If you did, leaving a thumbs up is what a mountain would do. If you're interested in more long-form content discussing games, subscribing might be a good idea. And if you truly love this video and want to ensure that content like this can survive on the platform, even though YouTube is what it is, well, then there's also the option to support the channel via Patreon. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time, lots of hugs.